Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I am so excited to come to you today with my 2023 Victober TBR. Although I have always loved the coming of autumn, cool weather is now inextricably tied to Victober, the wonderful booktube celebration of Victorian literature, from the Brontes and Dickens to Gaskell and Hardy, and everything else written during that extraordinary period of time. While reading both old favorites and new to me books and authors is always a wonderful experience, even better is the conversation that happens here on BookTube. If you haven't participated before, I hope you will enjoy it as much as I have over the last several years. The challenges for this year's Victober are quite interesting. As I was watching the announcement videos early in the month and thinking about what I wanted to read this year, I came up with an absolutely unwieldy list of way too many choices. But I've now whittled down my list of novels to one book per challenge. In addition to the novels, I want to mention a couple of related nonfiction books I'd like to read during Victober as well. It's still a little too long. But let's get to them. The first prompt I want to mention is the challenge put together by Katie at Books and Things, who asks us to read a piece of Victorian New Woman fiction. That is a book about the new breed of women in the latter years of the Victorian period who embraced education and careers rather than more conventional ideals about Victorian womanhood, rooted exclusively in marriage and child-rearing. What a wonderful prompt. I'm planning to read The Odd Woman by George Gissing, about single women at the turn of the century trying to carve out a degree of independence for themselves outside of marriage. Although I've never actually put The Odd Women on a Victober TBR, or at least I don't think I have, it has been hovering right nearby for quite some time. I'm thrilled to see that many of the rest of you have this particular Gissing novel on your list too, and I'm eager to hear what you think. The second challenge I'll mention is from Kate Howe. Read a Victorian work featuring a stranger or an outsider. I want to read Reuben Sachs by Amy Levy, a novel about what the editor of this particular edition thinks of as the double consciousness of the semi-assimilated Victorian Jew. Levy writes about the relationship between two cousins, Reuben and Judith, and the tensions between their Jewish identity and the English society in which they live. From what I've heard, Levy is writing in part as a reaction to George Eliot's Daniel Deronda, a book Levy felt romanticized Victorian Jews. I'll talk a lot more about that in a future video, as well as about her relationships with other Victorian authors and her sexuality. Although I haven't seen anyone else list this particular book, I'm excited to hear that so many of you will be reading other works by Amy Levy, including her Romance of the Shop, which many of you chose for Katie's New Woman prompt. Okay, the next challenge is from Marissa at Blatantly Bookish. Read a Victorian work by an author who's new to you. For this one, I want to read yet another novel by an author interested in the idea of the new woman, Amy Dillwyn, and her novel Jill, about a woman of means who runs away after her mother dies by disguising herself as a lady's maid, and she becomes very close to her new mistress. The book is about, quote, unfolding love for the woman she works for, as the back cover says. The novel is at least in part inspired by the author's own relationship to a woman she called her wife, but at least according to the back cover, she couldn't have. I'm looking forward to reading the novel, but also learning a bit more about Amy Dillwyn. My last two novel choices are much more widely read, and while I've not yet read either of the two, both of them have been on my radar since I was in high school. The first one is a response to Petra's challenge to read a Victorian first-person narrative. For this one, I've chosen The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Bronte. Now, this one is kind of a book of shame for me. It's been on several of my Victober TBRs over the years, and it's pretty wild to me that I've not read it for Victober or any other reason. For longtime viewers of this channel, you may know that the book I've considered my very favorite novel since the time I was 11 or 12 was penned by Anne Bronte's sister Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre. That I still haven't read this one? Well, I blame it on Emily, whose Wuthering Heights disappointed me so much back when I was a preteen, because it wasn't just like Jane Eyre. But the time has come to read Tenant. And for the last challenge, Roz at Scallydowling About the Books asks us to read a Victorian work in which class features strongly. She's pointed out that readers can effectively read any novel when looking at the place of class in a book, perhaps especially any Victorian novel written at a time when the meaning of class was, at least to a certain degree, going through a major transformation as society became more urban and more industrialized. The book I want to read is one I've been a bit intimidated by for years, The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. James is often considered a Victorian author because he wrote in Britain during the latter part of the 19th century, but he's also an American author, and this book is partially about the differences in how class was conceptualized during those years in the UK versus in the US. For me, this book is, like Anne Bronte's, on my It's About Time list. In addition to these novels meeting the challenges, I've been thinking about 3 works of nonfiction I'm eager to read. The first is called My Victorians, Lost in the 19th Century by Robert Clark, published by the University of Iowa Press in 2019. According to the back of the book, Charles's work is, quote, a hybrid in both form and content. It's part memoir, an extended lyric essay, but also a work of biography and photography and cultural and literary and art history. It sounds like the kind of book I love, something that blends the nerdy, both historical and literary nerdiness, with the personal in a smooth narrative. The next nonfiction work I'd like to get to is Walking the Invisible, Following in the Brontes' Footsteps by Michael Stewart, first published in 2021, I think. This book is another in that hybrid style, a personal narrative of the author as he takes what the back cover calls a wild and windy journey, tracing the paths that the Brontes trod while they were writing their most famous works, and discovering the social and political history behind these landscapes. In other words, Stewart is writing about how the landscape shaped both the Brontes and also how following them shaped him. The end of the book has a handful of very specific walks with recommended stops and even information about where to park or where to find snacks in the area or how to get there on public transportation. And for my final Victober possibility, I'm really excited to read The Dress Diary, Secrets from a Victorian Woman's Wardrobe by Kate Strasdon, which was released here just this summer. I've had the book on hold at my local library for a while now, and it just arrived, just in time for Victober. This is a book about a young woman who in 1838 was given a diary on her wedding day, which she filled with snippets of fabric, taken from her clothing and from the garments of her friends, which she carefully annotated. What a fascinating way to make a record of the life of a community. As the dust jacket says, fragments of cloth become windows into Victorian life. And it goes on, it lays bare the whole of human experience in the most intimate of mediums, the clothes we choose to wear. I do have one additional little project during the month of October. I'm going to be traveling for a bit, and during my trip I have a couple of books connected to the place I'm going, one fiction and one nonfiction. More about that in the coming weeks. I'm hoping it won't interrupt my Victober reading too much. Well, that will do it for today. I am so excited for this year's Victober, as I am every year. Thanks to Katie and Kate, Marissa, Petra, and Roz for hosting and coming up with these wonderful challenges. And thanks to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.